It's also known as the craniosacral, because it's involving cranial nerves and sacral spinal nerves. Cranial nerves 3, 7, 9, and 10. So there's 4 cranial nerves. And then S2, S3, and S4. Notice that cranial nerves 3, 7, and 9 specifically innervate structures in the head. 3, the oculomotor, is going to be involved in pupillary constriction. Most of what the parasympathetic does is going to be the opposite of what sympathetic does. Typically, sympathetic and parasympathetic are antagonistic to one another. Sometimes they do work together, sometimes they work alone. But typically, they are antagonistic to one another. So, if the sympathetic does pupillary dilation, parasympathetic will do pupillary constriction. We also have some salivary glands here. Notice that the vagus nerve, vagus means wandering, the vagus nerve travels throughout the abdominal and thoracic cavities and innervates pretty much every organ of the abdominal and thoracic cavities. The heart, the lungs and the bronchial tree, the stomach, the liver, the spleen, the pancreas, the kidney. Notice it does not innervate the adrenal gland. The small intestine and the large intestine, and the vagus nerve, the farthest it goes, is right up here to what we call the left colic flexure, which is where the transverse colon bends down and becomes a descending colon. That's as far as the vagus nerve goes. Anything below this point here, we're going to have those sacral spinal nerves. So the descending colon, sigmoid colon, the rectum, urinary bladder, specifically the muscles of the urinary bladder, and then the reproductive organs for male and female will be innervated by S2, 3, and 4. Let's talk about ganglia. Just like sympathetic, we have autonomic ganglia, except they're a little different. These are called terminal ganglia. And these terminal ganglia are going to be either right directly on the effector or very, very close to the effector. Unlike the chain ganglia or collateral ganglia, they're typically quite a ways from those effectors. You can see that these little red dots represent the postganglionic neurons. Notice that they are right there. Whereas over here, notice how long a lot of those postganglionic fibers are. We also see what are called nerve plexuses. We talked about the spinal nerve plexuses, but there's also some autonomic nerve plexuses as well. We can see several different plexuses here involving the vagus nerve, and we also see a nerve plexus here involving those sacral spinal nerves. And that means that fibers from those different spinal nerves kind of cross over and kind of intermingle, and so you may have you may have fibers from all three of these spinal nerves going into the reproductive organs instead of from just one. Same thing over here. We do have some nerve plexuses here as well in the sympathetic. Now, just like in sympathetic, if here's our ganglion, what neurotransmitter is going to be released from that preganglionic fiber? Always acetylcholine, regardless if it's sympathetic or parasympathetic. The postganglionic fiber will also always release acetylcholine in the parasympathetic. So the parasympathetic is exclusively acetylcholine at both synapses, at the ganglion and at the effector. You can omit this slide. I was going to talk about the different receptors, but we'll worry about that later. Yes.